The things we struggle against are rarely the forces themselves, but our fixed interpretations of them. We spend lifetimes trying to alter the world around us, to tame the chaos, predict the market, or control another person's reaction. The mistake is in assigning value and permanence to external facts. True power rests not in changing what happens, but in how we process it when it cannot be changed. We assume that struggle implies a gap, the space between our expectations and reality. We seek systems, perfect routines, flawless understanding, ultimate safety, that promise to close this intimidating distance. This constant effort is exhausting because it presupposes that freedom requires mastery over circumstance. But what if the problem is not external lack of control, but an internal misunderstanding of agency? What if we are spending all our emotional and cognitive energy fighting reality itself, rather than recognizing the single place where true action can occur? The necessary shift is learning to distinguish between merely accepting an event and actively choosing a response to it. The Stoics understood this fundamental distinction almost 2,000 years ago. They taught that life presents us with discrete inputs, things like loss, criticism, or physical pain. These events are indifferent, they simply happen. Wisdom, according to them, is the radical realization that these external facts do not carry inherent meaning until we assign it. Marcus Aurelius did not preach resignation, but radical responsibility over one's own judgment. He believed that trouble does not cause distress. Rather, our judgment of the trouble causes distress. Our narrative structure, the story we tell ourselves about why something is unfair or catastrophic, is where all suffering begins and can end. This framework gives us a tool, the ability to step back from the immediate emotional reaction and observe the judgment forming in its place. This leads inevitably to the complication of emotional inertia. It is far easier, emotionally speaking, to rage against an injustice than to sit quietly with the labor of reappraisal. We are culturally conditioned to believe that emotion must precede thought. We feel first, then we act or justify. But this structure builds a brittle mind. The moment we allow fleeting passion, the sudden flash of anger, the deep ache of envy, to define our understanding of reality, we lose the ground for reasoned choice. Our immediate self-pity becomes a kind of psychological gravitational pull, dragging us back to familiar patterns of victimhood or righteous indignation. The emotional life is loud and urgent. The philosophical one demands silence and distance. The real work, then, is not meditation in the traditional sense, which often feels like an escape from difficulty, but rather metacognition, thinking about how we think. It means viewing your own reactive mind as a third party, observing you having a reaction. When something difficult arrives, do not immediately label it bad. Instead, acknowledge the raw data. I have lost access to X, then, instead of leaping into why me. This is unfair. Pause and ask, what are the assumptions I am making right now that need testing? Are my expectations about how things should be more powerful than the reality they actually are? By treating your emotional gut response as merely a hypothesis, you create space. You move from being acted upon by impulse to observing the mechanism of impulse itself. This return brings us back to the initial paradox, that true power does not reside in altering the world around us, but in how we process it when it cannot be changed. We are so often focused on securing outcomes, a job, a relationship, a state of perfect peace, that we neglect the one mutable thing we actually possess, our interpretive filter. The events themselves remain neutral data points. It is the story built upon them that carries all the weight and meaning. We spend our lives seeking permanence in things, in institutions, in people, in even ourselves, when nothing remains fixed but the act of observation. We are perpetually wrestling against inevitable change, fighting entropy with sheer force of will. But if we accept the premise that everything is temporary, then that anxiety dissipates. The moment you realize that your subjective distress is an interpretive choice, rather than a factual requirement, you gain something enormous. You don't suddenly become immune to pain or disappointment, but you change the relationship you have with them. It's a radical kind of freedom, isn't it? Not the freedom to escape life, but the freedom found in simply letting it happen. This concept, that our suffering often stems not from external events themselves, but from our internal resistance to those events, is perhaps the most profound realization any human being can achieve. It requires us to shift from asking, "Why is this happening?" to instead asking, "How am I choosing to interpret what is happening?" The great philosophical pivot point here isn't nihilism, it's radical acceptance. It's acknowledging that resistance is the only thing truly fixed about us, the desperate desire for things to be different than they are right now. When we finally accept change not as an enemy, but as the fundamental operating principle of reality, we stop fighting time itself. We start moving with it. Think back to where we began, the search for permanence. We spend our early lives building these elaborate mental structures, the belief that if I achieve X, then I will finally be safe. Or if this relationship lasts forever, then my worth is secured. These fixed points are comforting illusions, like anchors in a river that only flows forward. But they prevent us from seeing the beauty of the current itself. The one mindset shift, therefore, isn't about adopting a new belief system or mastering some complex technique. It's simply about changing your default perspective on suffering and success alike. It is realizing that the gap between stimulus and response, that tiny, fragile space in which we exist, is where all our power resides. We are not defined by what happens to us. We are defined by how we choose to observe it. This gentle relinquishing of control, this willingness to simply be with the flux, is the ultimate act of self-mastery. The great comfort is that nothing ever has to be fixed in place for you to feel complete. You just have to keep watching. And in the quiet space between one breath and the next, there is everything you truly need.